See, interest rate caps and floors are ultimately options on interest rates. Earlier, when we had done the topic of derivatives, at that time also we had studied about option contracts. We can use option contracts and design a large number of strategies. See, I can design a straddle strategy, a strap strategy, strip, strangle, bull spread, bear spread, butterfly spread. I hope that rings something in your mind, right? So there are different types of strategies that we can design using options. Similarly, in the world of interest rate options, when you have a cap and a floor, I can use cap and floor and design a very popular strategy known as an interest rate collar. So basically, interest rate collar is a strategy where we will combine a cap and a floor. Let's see what kind of strategy is an interest rate collar. What I will do in interest rate collar is I shall simultaneously, okay, I shall simultaneously buy cap, sorry, I'll simultaneously buy cap and sell floor. Yes, I will buy cap and simultaneously I will sell a floor. Now, what will be the end outcome of this? Okay, when you buy a cap and simultaneously you sell a floor, what will happen? If you buy a cap, you will get a right to borrow. Of course, without any obligation. You'll get a right to borrow without any obligation at contracted interest rate. Okay. And what will happen when you will sell a floor? In a floor, you will get obligation to borrow without any right at contracted interest rate. Okay, this is what will happen when you will be doing two things simultaneously. I'll show you the note which is already there in your books. See, we are discussing this. If you buy a cap, you will get a right to borrow. And if you sell a floor, right, this is the combination that I am making. If you sell a floor, you will get obligation to borrow. So I am getting a right to borrow as well as I am getting an obligation to borrow. Okay, let's return back. So in a collar strategy, I will buy a cap option. In a collar strategy, I will simultaneously sell a floor. I will buy a cap at a rate which is higher than the rate at which I am selling a floor. This is a precondition in an interest rate collar. The cap rate should be higher than the floor rate. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's put it in this way. Let's see what will happen when you design this kind of a strategy. Okay. So let's say we buy cap at 11%. Let us say we sell floor at 8%. I just want to know that if this is what I am doing, what will be the position that will emerge? Okay, I just want to know what will be the position that will emerge. Okay, now let's put it in this way. Actual interest rate. Let's take some figures and understand the entire functioning of this strategy. Cap rate is cap exercised. Okay. Then I will introduce a floor rate is floor exercised, or let's put before this, let's say is cap exercised. Then I'll say difference received, then we say floor rate is floor exercised, difference paid. Okay, you have sold a floor, so you have obligation, so you will not receive a difference, you will have to pay a difference. And finally, I'll say effective interest rate. What is our effective interest rate? I want to know that. Right, so based on this table, we want to really understand the functioning of this entire strategy. Okay, let's say the actual interest rate turns out to be 13%. I'll just put the cap rate over here, 11%. I'll put the floor rate over here, 8%. Let's present our arguments. Actual interest rate is 13, while the cap rate is 11. Okay, let me clarify over here. You are purchased this and this you have sold. Okay, now because you have purchased a cap is giving you a right to borrow. Continuously keep this thing in mind. You have purchased a cap, so cap is giving you a right to borrow, and you have sold a floor. You have an obligation to borrow. Okay, fine. So actual interest rate is turning out to be 13%. Cap is giving you a right to borrow at 11. New loans are available at 13%. Now tell me, will you like to borrow at 13% or will you like to borrow at 11%? Cap is giving you a right to borrow at 11. So will you like to borrow at 11 or will you like to borrow at 13? Obviously, if borrowing is available at 11, I will like to borrow at 11. So if the question is the cap exercised? My answer will be yes, that yes, I will exercise the cap. So what will happen? I will actually borrow at 13, but because my cap rate is 11, I will get a difference of 2%. So I will receive a difference of 2%. Great. Now, the floor I have sold. Now here be very careful. You have sold a floor. If you have sold a floor, that means you have only obligations. You know, in the world of options, people who have obligations do not decide whether it should be exercised or not. In other words, you as a seller of floor will not decide whether I should exercise the option or not. Only the people who has right, only the people who has right, they will decide whether the option should be exercised or not. So since you have sold a floor, there must be someone who has purchased the floor. The person who has purchased the floor has a right to lend money, has a right to deposit money. I am talking about a person who has purchased a floor. I'll show you that section of the note also. See, you have sold the floor, right? Your position is this, but your position is a position of obligation. People who have obligations don't take decisions. People who have rights will take the decision. So who will take the decision? The person who has purchased the floor from you. The person who has purchased the floor from you has a right to lend. If lend is difficult to understand, understand as deposit. The person who has purchased a floor has a right to deposit money. Okay, return back to that table. So yes, the person who has purchased the floor from you at 8% has a right to lend money at 8. Right now the interest rate is 13%. So that person can lend money at 13% and earn interest, or earn interest by lending at 8%. Tell me, if you have purchased the floor, what will you do? Will you lend money at 13% and earn money, or will you lend money at 8% and earn interest? Obviously, I will like to earn interest at a higher rate. So I will like to lend money. I will like to deposit money at 13%. So is the floor exercised? The answer is no. The other party will allow, the person who has purchased the floor from you will allow the floor to expire. So no difference is required to be paid. So find out what is your effective interest rate. You ultimately were able to borrow at 11%, right? Ultimately, you have been able to borrow at 11%. Comfortable? New loans is I'm borrowing actually at 13%. Understand that? I'm actually borrowing at 13%, but I'm receiving a difference of 2%. So 13 minus 2, my effective borrowing rate is 11%. Fine. Okay. Let's take another rate. 9%. Okay, I'm taking 9%. Let me put 11% here and 8% here. So actual interest rate is 9% now. New loans are available at 9%. Cap is giving you a right to borrow at 11. I go to the bank says that yes, right now the interest rate is 9%. So you can borrow at 9. Tell me, will you borrow at 9 or will you borrow at 11 through the cap? Obviously, I will like to borrow at a lower rate. So the question is the cap exercised? My answer is no. Cap is not exercised. It is allowed to expire. So I will not receive any difference. Fine? Okay. What about the floor? Floor we have sold. The person who has purchased the floor from us has a right to lend money. That person can earn interest by lending money at 9%, or that person can earn interest to the floor at 8%. Obviously, that person will like to earn interest at 9%. And because he will like to earn interest at 9%, the floor will be allowed to expire. So is the floor exercised? Answer is no. Difference paid? Nothing. So what is the effective interest rate this time? Okay, effective interest rate this time, you will be actually borrowing at 9. Okay, you will actually borrow at 9. No difference is going to be received, no difference is going to be paid. In other words, it is turning out to be 9% for us. So our effective interest rate is 9%. Comfortable with it? Okay, let's take one more. What if the interest rate is 6%? Let me put 11 over here. Let me put 8 over here. The rate of interest is 6%. New loans are available at 6%. Cap is giving you a right to borrow at 11, but I can actually borrow at 6%. Obviously, I'll borrow at 6%, isn't it? So the cap is allowed to expire, right? The cap is allowed to expire. Difference received? Nothing is received. Okay. Floor rate is 8%, but you have sold a floor. The person who has purchased the floor from you has a right. The person who has purchased the floor from you has a right to lend money at 8%. Right now, the interest rate is 6%. Okay, interest rate is 6%. So if the person is lending at the actual rate, then that person can earn interest only at 6%. But through the floor, that person can earn interest at 8%. Obviously, that person will like to earn interest at a higher rate. So is the floor exercised? Answer is yes. The floor is exercised. 8 minus 6, the difference paid is 2% by us. Comfortable? Again, I'll repeat for the floor. You have sold a floor. So the person who has purchased the floor has a right to lend money or the right to deposit money. That person can deposit money at 8% and earn interest. But right now, deposits are giving only 6%. So why will I earn interest at 6%? I will like to earn interest at 8%. So I will exercise the floor. And because I'll exercise the floor, the difference of 2% will be payable, right? The other person will receive 2% difference. So we as a seller will have to pay. So we'll have to pay 2% of the interest. Question is, what is my effective interest rate this time? See, you will actually borrow at 6%. You will actually borrow at 6%, but you will have to pay a difference of 2%. So you will pay 6% for the loan that you have borrowed. You will pay 2% to the buyer of the floor. So effectively your rate of interest, yes, effectively your rate of interest is 8%. Comfortable? Okay, let's take one more. What if the actual rate is 12%? actual rate of interest is 12. New loans are available at 12%, but I can borrow through the cap at 11. Obviously, I will like to borrow at 11. Is the cap exercised? Answer is yes. Difference received 1%. Okay. I have sold a floor. The person who has purchased the floor from me has a right to lend money at 8%. So that person can deposit money at 8% or can deposit at the actual rate of 12. Now, why will that person deposit at 8? So floor allowed to expire. No difference to be paid. Question is, what is my effective interest rate? Effective interest rate? I have borrowed at 12, but I will receive a difference of 1. So I am actually borrowing at effectively at 11%. And the final situation, let's say the interest rate keeps on falling and has become 2%. Think for a moment. It has fallen to 2%. New loans are available at 2%, but you can borrow through the cap at 11. Have I lost my mind? Obviously, if loans are available at 2%, I will borrow at 2%. So is the cap exercised? No, cap is not exercised. Any difference received? No. What about the floor? The person who has purchased the floor from me has a right to lend money at 8%. That person can lend money at 8 or lend money at 2%. Or think about deposit. New deposits are available at 2% interest rate, while through the floor that person can earn interest at 8%. Obviously, that person will like to earn interest at 8%. So is the floor exercised? Answer is yes. 8 minus 2, the difference paid is 6%. So you are actually borrowing at 2, but you have to pay a difference of 6. So your effective interest rate turns out to be 8%. Now, if you look at the final rates that we are getting, just try to understand this point now. This is the main conclusion. Interest rate is 13%, interest rate is 12%, but still my effective interest rate is 11%. I am not borrowing at 13 or 12, I am able to borrow at 11. Okay, interest rate is 9%, then my effective rate is 9. Interest rate is 6%, interest rate is 2%, still it becomes 8 and 8. We are getting a range, 8 to 11%. We are getting a range now. Your borrowing rate is never crossing 11% and is also never falling below 8%. This is what is happening in a collar. This is what a collar does. A collar will fix a band of interest rates. The technical term that we use is that a collar will fix a band of interest rate. This is a band that you have created, 8 to 11, the floor rate and the cap rate. Your actual borrowing rate will never cross the upper limit of the cap, and your actual borrowing rate will never fall below your contracted floor rate. So the moment I say I have entered into a collar, and the moment I tell you that my cap rate is 11 and the floor rate is 8, if you are a knowledgeable person, you know from the very beginning that your actual interest rate will be never less than 8 and your actual borrowing rate will be never more than 11. Ignoring the premiums, of course, right? That disclaimer is always there. So this is what a collar will be doing. It will fix, right, a band of interest rates within which your borrowing rate shall fluctuate. Now, question is, when shall we prefer this strategy? When should I do this strategy? You should do this strategy when you are of the view that the interest rates will rise. Interest rate collar is a strategy which is designed to protect the borrower from rise in interest rates. Now, someone can counter argue that if you want to protect yourself from rising interest rates, then simply buying cap is not sufficient. See, if I simply buy a cap, it is quite sufficient. Even a cap is doing the same thing. For example, I buy a cap at 11% and the interest rate turns out to be 12, interest rate turns out to be 13, interest rate turns out to be 15. I will have a right to borrow at 11%. See, I will have a right to borrow at 11. So a cap also is protecting me from rising interest rates. If cap itself is protecting me from rising interest rates, then why should I go for a collar? Because ultimately the objective of collar is also the same. I prefer collar when interest rates are expected to rise. Now, the benefit of collar is that you will simultaneously sell a floor. Now, when you buy a cap, you will have to pay premium, and when you sell a floor, you will receive premium. This is the benefit over here. If you are exclusively buying cap, then you will exclusively pay premium. But when I simultaneously sell a floor, I receive premium. The idea is to reduce the cost of the strategy. I want to reduce the cost of the strategy. I see that I can buy only cap, but then the premium is slightly on a higher side. But when I simultaneously sell a floor, I also receive premium, and thereby I bring down the cost of the strategy. It's even possible to design a strategy where the net premium is zero. Net premium is zero. Cap is available, let us say, at a premium of X, and floor is also trading at a premium of X. I will go for a collar. I have to pay X sum of rupees as premium. I will receive the same amount as premium when I sell the floor, and thereby design a strategy which has a zero cost. Of course, this is an extreme thing. If this is not possible, at least I can reduce the cost of the strategy. That's the main purpose of entering into a collar. We have a write-up on collar. I can just end it by discussing the same. Of course, every point has been discussed. This is only to summarize. Collars are simultaneous purchase of cap and sell of a floor, as I said. The cap rate is set above the floor rate. In our example, 11%, floor was 8. The objective of the buyer of a collar is to protect against rising interest rates. The purchase of a cap protects against rising interest rates. Okay. And the floor will generate premium income. That was the rationale behind going for a collar. And then the main thing, a collar creates a band within which the buyer's effective interest rate fluctuates. I've shown that by way of example over here itself, that how we are creating a band of 8 to 11%. In certain circumstances, cap is exercised. In certain circumstances, floor is exercised. In certain circumstances, cap and floor both are allowed to expire. And that is how a band will be created. Whenever you will exercise the cap, understand this, whenever you will exercise the cap, your borrowing rate will be the cap rate. Whenever you will exercise the floor, your borrowing rate will be the floor rate. And whenever the cap and the floor both are allowed to expire, right? Both are allowed to expire, then the rate of interest will be between the contracted cap and the floor rate. This is what will be the end outcome.